Good afternoon, everyone. We're going to get started in just about another minute, and we're just waiting for the last few attendees. I see a few people are still joining, and then we will get started. Okay, we'll get started here. I think we've got mostly the attendees. So thank you for taking some additional time out of your afternoon. Today we're going to be looking at part 3 of these various set of tools for business and technology analysts. These tools are quite dynamic. They allow us to do a number of different things within the application. And these tools are really some of the basic fundamental tools. I know there's a lot of new things that come out with JD Edwards, but sometimes we forget some of the basic items. So this is going to be a refocus on some of these basic items that help the everyday troubleshooting throughout the support process for JD Edwards. So just a quick introduction to myself again. So I've been at Syntax for over 15 years. I've got over 20 years of IT experience with ERP cloud mobility and enterprise applications. And I've supported all of various different databases and platforms. I've done lots of installs across a number of different continents. And I've had consulting engagements with well over 200 different Enterprise One customers. So we're just going to do a quick review of Syntax. So Syntax as an organization, we've been around for over 45 years. Our focus is on the remote services and hosting for various Oracle ERP applications. So JD Edwards, EBS, PeopleSoft, Hyperion, OBIE. So we cover off the full range of Oracle applications. We do also offer consulting services, so that's financial, all the different application modules, technology consulting, database consulting, as well as infrastructure consulting. We do application management services, so in the case where you've got a number of business analysts and you want to make them more productive and add additional value, we can take on the load of doing the day-to-day applications, as well as we offer traditional cloud solutions and other associated technologies. Just to show you where we're located, so we do have a global reach, so a number of data centers across North America, application support areas in other areas as well. So really today what we're going to cover is some of the support and troubleshooting. I'm going to, in some cases, just because we do have a limited amount of time, give you some references on that. You all can also download the replay from our website. And what I'm going to focus on is some of those beginning tools, Server Manager, Performance Workbench, some of the things that kind of enable you. And where there is a reference or a link that I can provide, I'm going to insert that into my presentation, as well as show you at the end where to get all of this information firsthand so that you can dig through and discover a little bit more and go a little bit deeper. So we're going to start with the support and troubleshooting. So the first application we're going to look at is Server Manager. And Server Manager has been around for a really long period of time. It has changed somewhat over a couple of years, but Server Manager first came out with tools 897. And what Server Manager is a web-based management console that allows us to configure, manage, do all these different things with JD Edwards. And so we can upgrade the tools released from here. We can do the administration. We can see who's on the system. We can audit the history. So we're going to take a look at that. So we'll just kind of pop out here. The best way is to kind of show you that firsthand. And so we will just going to go to our remote system here. And we'll just open that up. And so as we go through Server Manager, I will point out some of the key items that we're going to be looking at here. And just keep in mind that Server Manager has been around. There's been a lot of changes in it. So first we're going to do is go directly into it. And here we go. And I'm just going to sign out here because I was signed in before. So as we sign into Server Manager, this is a larger demo system with a number of different things on the actual system. So first we can see is we get a whole view of the actual complete hierarchy of JD Edwards. So we see all the servers, all of the various different instances. This is a demo system, so there is a number of things installed on here, Orchestrator, AIS, all the various different environments, but we're just going to focus on a couple of different components. So first thing is we can select these various different views. So we can see the view by type. So we can see all the enterprise servers, ADF servers, Orchestrator Studio servers, AIS servers, deployment servers. So that's the first thing that we can do. And we can also see the overall status of these and the server group that it's associated with. The server group is just another way that we can organize things. So we can see all the DV servers, all the PY servers all together. And that we can see that they are all within, in this particular case, they're all within the same server group. So that's just one view. Typically, we'll see the managed home and managed instances. So a home is an agent that's installed on a server, and an instance is a particular component of JD Edwards. We're going to start with the enterprise server. So Server Manager allows us to see the configuration that is there, what is currently running. We can see that this is the tools 9225, so just one shy of 923. And by this, we can go through, we can see the configuration, but we can also control what configuration different individuals can actually see. So this allows not only the CNCs to go through, see everything, but I always encourage the business analyst to obtain access to this, somewhat typically less access than the administrators, but this will allow you to go through, see what is currently running on the system. And so as we kind of go through the enterprise server here, this is looking at the technical details, but we can go through and we can see the configuration, as well as we can see the details around what each item is for. And if there have been any changes, we can actually go through, we can see the configuration changes, the history, we can revert back to defaults. So we can also change the different defaults for different environments. And if we've got a perfect configuration, we can save these items here as the overall default. Other things within here, we can compare instances. So if we have multiple enterprise servers, always recommend to maintain as consistent as possible, but this would allow us to go through and compare different enterprise servers back against an actual template or model itself. Other things that we can do here is look at the configuration summary. We can save the configurations. So if I've got multiple enterprise servers or multiple configurations, I can save off this configuration, go to another configuration and restore those. Now, this is all dependent on what version of Server Manager that you are actually running. Well, I always recommend that you run a recent version of Server Manager as long as it's within the same tool set. So stick within 9.2 or stick within 9.1. So there's typically no harm, just a lot of benefit to keeping that Server Manager release up to date. One of the most important things that we'll look at here is the logging. But before we do that, we're going to take a look at the web server portion. So let's just find the DV instance. And the neat thing about this is we can actually go through, and from the business analyst standpoint, we can see who is actually on the system. So we can see the runtime metrics. If you notice that when there was a section for runtime metrics for the enterprise servers, there's a lot of information there that would be more technical in nature. So since this is directed towards business analysts and technical analysts, we're going to focus more on the web server components. So what we can see here, as I click on user sessions, I can see the individual user. He's called Demo 1A, the server he's logged on, the environment, where they're actually logged on, how long they've been logged on, and typically what applications they're running. So I can see that this user is in Enter Vouchers, and if I look over here, before I started this webinar, I had logged in to say, and went into the voucher entry application. Within that one application, I can do a couple of things. I can log individuals out of individual applications, so I can terminate them here. Or if we go back here, I can log them completely off the system, or I can actually send them a message itself. So that's just one usage, seeing who is on the system, what they are actually doing at that given point in time. And if there is some maintenance activity you had to run, or if you had to close a month end, you would be able to see who's in any relevant application. Other items what we can see here, going into a little bit more of the technical status here. So often this will not be beyond the realm of the business analyst, but we can see which business functions are being called. The most important thing that we can look at here is just going straight to the end. What I'll typically do is I'll say all, and I'll just kind of sort on the system errors, and that will just tell me if there's any business functions that have any type of errors. So that's a good place to check to see how the system is actually functioning, just by going through to check what errors are actually occurring on the system itself. Additionally, other items that we can look at is how these business functions are running. Are they taking a long period of time? So if I were to say, you know what, which business functions are taking the longest period of time on the system? So here's a function, it took 1,208 milliseconds, but the average time was pretty much close to that, the shortest time. So this gives us some statistics. This you can export out. You've got to just kind of select it on the screen. There are some other advanced JD editors or Oracle tools that allow us to collect this information, such as Enterprise Manager App Pack plugin, as well as Real User Insight, that do this a little bit more in an automated fashion. But you can do this manually, pull this data into Excel, and you can get some statistics on that and start analyzing to see where you might potentially have some issues. One really important thing that we're looking at here in terms of the business function, this isn't necessarily the business function name. This is the sub-function name. So what we're going to see in a little bit is how to actually go through and to translate this sub-function name into the actual object name itself. So we'll see that in a little minute here. Okay, other things that we can see here, the cache. So if you had to go through and reset the cache, this is where you would do it on the web instance. Now, cache is there for a reason. We don't recommend that you arbitrarily go through and refresh the cache, especially within a production environment. Within the non-production environments, if you're doing some configuration, you may want to lower the cache, or even move towards turning it off for the non-production environments if you're doing a lot of work on it that would require you to refresh the cache more often. Remembering that if I go through and I reset the cache, so there's the data dictionary, the service cache is going to be most of what we need here. So that's going to include the OCM mappings as well as the UDCs. When I hit clear cache, it only clears the inactive cache. So even though I clear that and do a refresh here, okay, so it's cleared the cache there, but if there's something currently being used, that still stays in memory. We can see the number of database connections, which is more informational, the runtime settings. So these are some of the settings, such as, let me just kind of scroll past some of the AS400 ones. So for example, result set timeout is when I hit find within an application, how long are those results held in memory before I have to go and perform that search all over again? So this is where we can dynamically reset this. Typically, this would only be done by a CNC. So this is dynamically for that instance, but we can also save these by changing them permanently. So that's more informational. The JDE net is really the connections from the web server to the enterprise server. And finally, the Java environment. This is fairly important because this tells us how much memory is actually being used. I can set the memory within the web instance very, very large. However, I want to know how much of that memory is actually being used. So in terms of troubleshooting, this is really key information to try and record right here. So those are just some of the quick troubleshooting things from Server Manager, informational to try and get it, the information. Let's also go back into the key dashboard. So again, there's a managed home. There's the enterprise servers by type. So I can quickly go through and I can see, all right, let me find the HTML. We're working with the DV instance. And so we can go through and get that information. Another thing that is fairly important here, let me just go to the main screen here. We can also search for resources. So we're gonna go through and we're gonna do that in one instant. But before we do that, we're gonna take a look at something called user activity, which is where we can search. So I'm gonna look for demo 1A, which was my user, and I think they're still logged in. And so let's look at a high level of detail and let's do a search. So this shows me all the resources that this particular user, demo 1A, is using at this particular time. So I can say, what are they doing? What are they consuming? And we can see which call object kernels that they're attached to, which security kernel, and other resources. We can see that these are the HTML sessions that they're actually in. So it can drill down to a very fine level, and we can actually go through and we can see the enterprise server kernels and all the resources that are actually being used and who in particular is attached to that. So very handy for troubleshooting. Hopefully we don't often have to go to that level, but it's very powerful to go through, see the user activity and drill down into it. We can also track server activity. So this is more creating monitors for individual events. So this is going to be more along what your CNC is going to do, and it's going to be really outside the realm of the business and technology analysts. So we're going to skip that for now and move directly onto table cache. Now, if you are on Enterprise 1.9.1 Update 2 or after, the table cache process has been rewritten so that it's going to automatically clear this a lot better. So you should not have to go in and clear the cache in the same way that you would have to on earlier levels, earlier releases. However, if I did want to clear the cache, I can put in a particular table. The most common one is the F0010, which is the accounting period. So if I've moved from accounting period 10 to accounting period 11, this is where we would go in and we would clear that cache. We can do it in one particular environment. And we can clear that cache, or we can clear all table caches. So we want to use that sparingly and not use that right away. Okay. Other things, if we kind of go back to the main menu, and if we go into Server Manager users, here's where we can go. We can start creating additional groups in here. Typically, we can go through, we can create a BA group, as well as we can create a help desk group. So the way we would actually go through and do that is we can create a user group, and we can call this BA team, and this is for the business analyst. So this is something your CNC would actually go through and do. And once we're here, we could say you can look at or monitor the configuration, potentially do user management. So we can go through, determine who can do what within the configuration. Typically monitor, we may not want to configure the console. But more specifically, do we want them to be able to clear the cache? We can maybe do a health check. We'll show you what that is. Do we want them to be able to manage the web sessions? So we typically have a default layout for what we consider as the business analyst. We also have a layout for what we consider as the help desk function. So the help desk would be able to reboot servers, kick people off, and other things else, whereas the business analyst we typically restrict to more viewing particular items. So we can say who's in which group and web sessions. So they can clear the cache, they can do a health check, they can view who's in which group, and they can do the web sessions. And the web sessions mean they can actually see who's on the system at any given time. I'm not going to go through and save that. We'll just do that more for informational purposes. So that's a high-level overview as to the key items that we can do within Server Manager. So we saw how we can do a number of items. The CNC activities are going to be more remote deployment, updates, and other major change management items, as well as the security items. But we can see the configuration that is there. We can see the normal configuration, and we can see the list of options, and we can see the history of changes. Those are the key things that the business analysts are going to want to look at, as well as who is currently on the system and what are they currently doing. But I've put some links and some document IDs that reference some of these things for Server Manager. Just please realize that there's going to be a difference between what the typical CNC will do and what the business and technology analysts are going to be using that for. All right, so we're going to look at Performance Workbench. Before we look at Performance Workbench, we're going to go back into Server Manager and just really kind of look at how to create a log on the system. So this is going to be perhaps up to the individual CNCs to determine what level of logging they may allow the business and technology analysts to do. Typically, this would be perhaps allowed in the non-production environments. Within the production environment, you want to control that a little bit more. Now, I would recommend allowing business and technology analysts to do this for the web servers only, and for the non-production web servers, not for the enterprise servers. So in this particular case, we will go into our, find my green, there it is. There's my development environment. And right at the bottom in Server Manager, we can see logging. Okay. It's very quick and easy to add an additional log. We also have to remember that we should delete existing logs that are there. So by default, JD Edwards, when it comes shipped, it's going to create a log. So if we look at this first line, it's going to create an E1 log, and it's only going to record the warnings and recoverable errors. So there's different levels of logging. So critical events is really, hey, only if the system is going down. By default, it's going to record warnings and recoverable errors. When we want to do user logs, it's typically going to be application level logs. And if you want all the information, you can go down to the level of low-level troubleshooting. Now, the format is going to tell you a couple of different things. So application format is going to be more of a summary. The technical format with threads, increase the amount of information. The next items here will tell us how many logs that we're going to have and whether it's going to overwrite those logs. Now, it's very difficult to deal with a very, very large logs in any of these applications. So we're going to say, let's control the size of each log so we can look at each one individual. And this is going to be, in this particular case, 10 meg. And it's going to create 20 of them. And when it gets to 21, it's going to overwrite the first one. And that's what that true means here. And the components are going to tell us which particular components. Right now we're on all, but we could say we only want to record the interoperability components, the JAS components, kernel messages, so various different ones. So in a way, you could turn on this logging pretty much for everyone, record only certain items, and it's somewhat of a big brother. So people have used this to audit different actions. Obviously, when you do turn on logging, it does have a impact overall on the performance, but more often than not, it's negligible unless you're recording it for everyone. So let's go ahead and add a log. We're just going to go and create user-specific log. I'm going to create that for demo 1B. We're going to hit OK here. And for this particular user, I'm going to say I want to do application. And we'll do technical format with threads. It's probably a little bit too much. And we're going to take all the defaults. So it's going to do a log file of 10 meg. It's going to go to a maximum of 20 of those files. And when it gets to the 21st, it's going to overwrite it. So we're going to hit apply. And it does sometimes take a little bit of while for the logging to actually go through and apply. And even when it's writing the logs, you're going to see a file that's got 0 bytes to it. That doesn't mean that there's nothing in that log. Just to prove that out, we're going to go through it just as soon as that's done. Perfect. And take a look at where the logs are. Now I've gone directly to where the logs are. However, you can go through and in Server Manager, if there are logs that are here, we can just go back to the instance and we can see the logs that are here. And there is, okay. So often we just need to log on with the actual user itself before it actually creates that initial first log. So I'm going to log on. Oh, we got to create a new instance here. So I'll just use another browser. And that was demo 1B. So we'll log on as demo 1B. And we'll log in as a capital asset manager. And so typically you will not see the logs until you log on as an individual. It might be a little bit even delayed. So let's just see when it actually creates that log. And we can see that as I logged on, it created that log. We can see it's got 0K, but if we look at the log, it's still, okay, it's still writing it. It's going to start filling that log in behind the scenes. So sometimes it takes a little bit of a delay before you can see that. You might even need to exit before you can actually see the logs itself. Okay, but I've logged on as 2 different users. I've gone through, done a number of actions as this particular individual. So this is my demo 1A user. And so we can go through, I've created a couple of different logs. And one thing about logs is they can be somewhat difficult to read at times. So I've generated some of these logs that are here. Okay. So I've created some logs, and what the performance workbench is going to allow us to do is to analyze those logs. So we don't need to be an expert in reading these logs. So I'm just going to close out some of these behind the scenes here. So we've gone through, we're going to take a look at Performance Workbench. And what Performance Workbench is, it's a standalone application that takes an Enterprise One log and extracts information to make it easier to troubleshoot and read the logs. So the logs record everything, how long everything takes, all the SQLs that are called, all the business functions that are called. Instead of reading the entire log, you can just say, show me which business functions were called, show me exactly how long each one took, and you can say, what about what SQL statements were run, what tables had selects on them. So it digs into a lot more detailed information and organizes it for you. So a very valuable tool. So we're going to go through that, but that's just an introduction of what it can actually do. It can actually go through, and for all the business functions that are run in one particular log sequence, it will time all of those items. So one of the key steps to troubleshooting is just to find out where the code is spending the most amount of time. So this is going to go through for every function. It's just going to summarize it all. We don't have to read anything. We just have to click a couple buttons, and it's going to tell us that information. If we think we have memory leaks, it's going to tell us how many times a cache operation was initiated, how many opens and how many closed. And it's no secret to troubleshooting. If we open something 1,000 times, it should close something 1,000 times. If those two don't add up, then we have a potential memory leak. We can also pull out all the SQL statements. So we want to say, well, what SQLs is it running behind the scenes? We can pull all of those out, which is fairly handy. So let's take a look at Just go back to our demo system. And I've just pulled up Performance Workbench. The where you get Performance Workbench, and I've just kind of put that up here so we can actually see. Okay, it's actually, I did actually close that, but if you go to My Oracle Support and simply search on Performance Workbench, that's going to give you an executable to install. I typically will put that just on the root, and then I'll create a folder called Input. And into that folder, I will drop in any log file that I find. So I've just put in one particular log file, and we're going to get rid of everything else. So this is just a log file right from here, and I've put that into my input folder. And then within Performance Workbench, I'm going to input that file. There's my only file here. And Performance Workbench allows us to say, okay, make sure we're on greater than an 8.9. We can have different levels of parsing. So what do we want to take as information? So do we want just the business function counts, open and close? So just give me the business function and tell me how many times it opened and closed it. We can say we want the selects as well. So if we just do this level of parsing and we say log parse, it's just going to give us a little bit of information about the business functions. But in my particular case, we're going to go and we want to grab everything. So we're going to go and select everything. We're going to tell it to do a summary file. And just before I do that, I'm going to delete what was created before. So we're going to do a log parse. We're going to generate a timing gap file. A timing gap file is very critical when you're troubleshooting a performance issue. The only thing that you need to do to resolve a performance issue is to determine where the code is spending the most amount of time. Is it the business functions? Is it the event rules? Is it doing the select? Is it doing the read writes to the database? The timing gap file simply tells you where the code is spending the most amount of time. Once you know that, you can focus on the issue. So that's one of the key troubleshooting techniques that I encourage you to take a look at. So when you do a log parse, we'll take a look at the entire thing here. And what we can see here is that we've got different sections here, so we can go specifically to each one of those. So this tells us the business function count. This is the timing count. So this tells me how many times it's selected from the F0009, F0011, F0013. So how many times, and we can see here it's running pretty quickly. It didn't really take any time at all because the counts are less than 1 millisecond. So this is a demo system. Everything's running. I'm the only user on the system. So everything is fast and efficient. Were there any business functions that returned any error codes? Were there any business functions that had a open-close mismatch? Were there any business functions that had any other issues? Now, when we're taking a look at the tables, we can see for each table here, we can see the number of opens, the number of close, number of selects, inserts, deletes, and updates. So we can see that there's one table here that it did a delete from, it did a couple of selects. So fairly useful information to see which tables have been opened. Additionally, the next layer after this is to go through and see how long it took to do the selects, the opens, and all of the other statements. So this is a little bit more detail in terms of what is above. Okay, and we can take a look at the timing. Let's choose one at random to see if we've got a timing. And so for each one of these, there's the selects, and we can see nothing is really taking any long period of time. So we don't really have any bottlenecks here that we need to focus on. So this information is available for the selects, the business functions, all of the various different components, and it provides us a log of all of those different items. We can do the same thing for a SQL parse. We'll have to move on just in the interest of time here. So we've just got a kind of a screenshot here, but we can go through, there's our SQL, here's how long each and every single statement took to run. So Performance Workbench is one of those areas where it's a great tool for troubleshooting. There's additional information on My Oracle Support, but it's something that we use at the beginning of our troubleshooting simply because it takes a lot of the effort out of it. In conjunction with that, the other tool that we typically use is a cross-reference facility. The cross-reference facility tells you all the interlinkings between all the various different JD Edwards tables. So in one of my previous webinars, I did go through how to get a linkage and diagram, so like a visual diagram as to how all the tables for one particular module are interrelated. So if you wanted to get a flow chart and for accounts receivable, then see all the major tables and how they're actually related, that is available for you on the system. So we're going to just log back in to DV. Okay, so we're just going to go into cross-reference facility. You can just fast pass to XREF. And the cross-reference facility, again, gives us those interlinkings. So if we want to say interactive applications, so we can say tables used by a particular interactive application. So let's go for the P4210, the old version of sales order entry. And here we can see all the tables that are used by this particular application. As you can see, we can look for information in a number of different ways. So now we can start asking very inquisitive questions. So for example, we can say what are all the named events that are used? What does this application use? What are all the forms in here? So there's lots of forms. Just generating the application in the background on demand. Okay. So we can do this for interactive applications, all sorts of unique questions. So what are all the forms within the address book? There's an A, B, C, D, E, and the F form. We can do the same thing for batch applications, business functions. So if there's a particular business function and we find an ESU and the ESU says, you know what, you need to take this and this is the business functions that's going to change. Well, you can instantly turn around and say, if I update that business function, what are all the applications and what are all the UBEs that I now have to go and test? This is a much more intuitive way of asking those types of questions. Of course, there are tables behind this, so different people, you can run some scripts on it in a more automated fashion, but that's essentially where it's coming from. So that's coming from the F980011 table, which is the table behind the cross-reference, which is the P980011. So great sorts of, all sorts of different questions that we can ask within our troubleshooting process. So the cross-reference facility, as I said, there's a couple different steps there. Now, when we went back and took a look at Server Manager, when we took a look at the functions that it gave us, when we went to look at the list of functions that were called, what it was actually giving us in Server Manager, if we take a look at Server Manager and we look into call objects, okay, so we don't want to know this name. What we want is the B04123455, because once we have that, we can go into the change assistant, which we reviewed in part 1. And once we know that, we can say, okay, you know what? I'd like to look for an ESU for the object name B42 something. And once we know that, we can go through and we can start saying, okay, is that problem already solved for 9.2? So that's a much quicker way of troubleshooting. The challenge that we have is that we don't have me just go back into, we don't have the name that allows us to look that up. Fortunately, if we go into the business function search, P98652, so what we can do with this particular application, this gives us our linkage between those applications. So if I say allowed functions for UDOs, just cut and paste that over here. Just justify that properly. So now this is telling us what we want to know. That is the N9860WA, and we can go into the change assistant, N98, and that was 60WA. So that we can see this for 9.2 was included in update 2. There was another issue before that. So if I was having an issue with that particular function, now I've resolved the issue. I haven't had to go into logging or anything else. I could see that perhaps in this particular case, this business function had a number of timeouts, a number of application errors, or a number of system errors. I don't always need to, and I don't always want to go into the actual logging itself. I can hopefully resolve a number of issues just by looking at the system statistics and then proactively determining, okay, that particular application, let's get a different number of one in this case. We'll take this one, and we're gonna plug it in here. Whoops. There's the application. And I can take that, plug that into Change Assistant, and then I can say, is this particular issue already resolved? So when we take a look at any of these particular items, we can take a look at the bugs. We can look at the objects by the bug. So if we take the object, in this particular case, it was the B9860. And for any of these here, we can open up and we can see the actual SARs. So if you double click that, oh, that one has actually moved. Let's find a different one. Okay, so that's not cooperating today, but we could typically see the details regarding the SAR here. And what we can do is we can take a look at the description and say, does that fit our actual issue itself? So that's why that business function search, as well as the other components, are very important. So moving on, we'll have to speed things up a little bit there, but I think that's some very useful information. So the customization object analyzer and the application configuration analyzer are tools that come with JD Edwards to help you compare things between different environments. So the customization object analyzer is really pretty simple and straightforward. I've provided a link with direct videos on Learn JDE, as well as some document IDs. But this one, very simple. If we want to go through and determine whether or not or what type of changes that we have in our system, we can go through and we gotta go into batch versions first. So we're going to batch versions, and then we can see there are a couple of UBEs to load the information first. So before you actually can go through and run the object customization analyzer or the application configuration analyzer, you have to load the data. The data, it's fairly straightforward. There's some processing options. You just have to enter the environments or the data sources that you want to compare. So initially, the UBEs that you have to run are the data load and then the summary report, but you can also run the detail. You can also run the detail report. Once you've done that, you can start running the comparisons, and you have to run these reports inside the different environments that you might want to compare. So if you want to compare PD and DV, you have to run this in production, then you have to run it in development, then you can run the comparison reports. But definitely the loads as well as the summary, you need to run within that initial environment, and then you can compare the different environments or path codes amongst one another. So very, very handy tool that we can use here. And the other component of the same thing is really the application configuration analyzer. Works fairly the same way. So we do the data loads. So they're the same data loads over here. Once we've done the data loads, we can go through, we can compare the data dictionary. Most people still have one data dictionary, some have two. But this is very useful for comparing user-defined codes and the versions between environments. Comparing the UDCs is really just a report. We just enter the source environment, the output environment, and then it's going to give us a nice little comparison as to the differences between them. Similarly for versions, except the versions puts it all into an Excel comparison for us. So neat, handy tools. We're not going to have time to go through all of that today, but there's a step-by-step video on learnjde.com. So as opposed to telling you exactly how to do it, that's already in the video. At the end, we're going to show you exactly how to go and to play that exact same video that we're referencing here. Support Assistant is a tool that you may get asked to use by JD Edwards support. Really what Support Assistant does is it goes through and grabs some system information. It was written a couple of years ago, not used as frequently, but still sometimes used. So in case you are having some difficulty gathering some information, the support analyst from JD Edwards might ask you to run the Support Assistant. So if you're having a CNC issue, it will go through, grab some of the CNC configuration, put it into a zip file, and then you'll have to send that over to JD Edwards. You'll have to attach it to the support case. If you are having a functional issue, it will grab your processing options for your application and other related applications, and it's going to put that together and send that over to JD Edwards. So instead of you having to write, document, and do things like screenshots and everything else, Support Assistant is one way of making that entire process go a lot faster. Resetting the cache, we already showed you how to do that. Resetting the cache at one point only used to be in work submitted jobs. We've already gone through and shown you where and how to do that within Server Manager. Hopefully you should not have the need to do that. If you are on Enterprise 1 9.12 or later, the caching has been much improved. So if you're on 9.2, you don't really have to worry about it. If you are in a prototype environment, you can definitely lower the value and turn off the cache, but we definitely do not recommend that for the production environment. Record reservations are another item. So I think everyone has seen this at some point in time. So record reservations, if a user goes into a application, and let's suppose they go into the application and, oh, I forgot the 0, P. So if you're entering a journal entry or another, something like a journal, it will actually lock that record to your user ID. And what that does is it ensures that two people are not working on the same thing at the same time. Now, I don't have any on here because, again, it's a single-use system. But if that user is working on something and they go away for lunch or go home or on vacation for 2 weeks, it's still locked to their user ID. So this is the area where you can kind of go in, reset those. There's nothing to be reset here. Most people end up writing something really quickly. We certainly do for our customers, where it's going to automatically clear those record reservations after about 2 hours, or whatever your timeout period happens to be. Okay, so I really wanted to get over onto the website so we can see where to grab some of this particular information. So there's a lot of websites that are available for support and troubleshooting. I'm going to focus on a couple of them, and when you download this, you can grab the rest of them. My Oracle support, make sure you know how to use the Oracle support site, entering tickets, looking up certifications, and more specifically, how to track a bug if you need to. The key areas that we look at for My Oracle support is also there's a place called Hot Topics. So, which is under the settings. Going through the hot topics allows you to go through and to subscribe to information that might be relevant to you. So we're quickly going to take a look at the hot topics on Oracle support. So as we go into the support site, I'm just going to log in here. And if you've got a smaller screen size, you might need to scroll over. But if you just go into to settings and go into hot topics, so I've just kind of configured this so that it's going to email me information on tools and the address book on a periodic basis. And we can see, do I want it to send me knowledge alerts or bugs, if something's been de-supported or if there's a field action. All customers have full access to this. So this allows you to get critical information pushed to you rather than having to go look for it. The most important thing to remember when you go into the My Oracle support is to remember that there's a lot of different things that Oracle does. There's a lot of different products. So because there's a lot of different products, it's going to look at everything by default. So if you look at the top right here where it says product line JD Edwards Enterprise One, if you do not have that turned on, you're looking at absolutely everything that Oracle makes. So what we recommend is you go through and you do a new Power View, and you do it by product line, and product line in this particular case is going to be JD Edwards. You could say JD Edwards Enterprise One and World, and that's going to restrict your searches to those topics. You could even add BI Publisher to that if you're using OVR, but that's going to be a lot more helpful because it's not going to search all of Oracle every single time you do a search. The other components within here, there's the Update Center. The Update Center is a branch here. So if we go in Patches and Updates, you can also do updatecenter.oracle.com. Once we go to JD Edwards, this is going to launch the Update Center. It's going to launch the Update Center. There we go. Okay. So once we're in here, it's going to actually supposed to open another link there, but we can search for various different components and updates and patches. We can also look at the Patch Advisor. The Patch Advisor is very useful for saying, okay, if you're running a certain version, what specific patches should you have based on which applications you are actually running. LearnJDE.com, we're going to come back to that. We're going to finish with that one in particular. And the reason that I'm going to go to that one is when you go to LearnJDE.com, it can be a little bit more difficult at times to navigate directly to where you want to go. So LearnJDE.com is the central point where you want to go to grab all of your information. And the way that they have it organized here is we can say, you know what, let's say, for example, we want to look at some citizen development. And it gives us some background information. Let's go into watch lists. And so it's giving us some videos. But what if I wanted some other piece of content? What if I just want to search for what's there? So it can sometimes be a little bit more difficult to search. We can look at UX1. And it gives us information on UX1 based on relevance. Now, that's one way of getting there. There is another pathway here which goes through the Oracle Learning Library. And going through the Oracle Learning Library might be a little bit better or sometimes a little bit easier shortcut. So in this particular case, I'm going to go to JD Edwards. I'm going to go into Tools and Technology. And here we can start looking at individual items, or we can just say all of JD Edwards. Okay, and we can do it based on job role, function, or other items. Once we are here, this is sometimes an easier place to go through and to do some searching. There's new releases, new initiatives, and you can see that there are a number of different tabs and pages here. So creating a rule within the orchestrator. Let's just take a look at lots of orchestrations, Enterprise One Search, provisioning. So these are a really good list of helpful items. And if you notice, there's different icons that are associated here. Some of these are going to be specifically tutorials. Other ones are going to be specific to a little bit of a document to pull down. But let's pull down, in particular, 9.2. Okay. So these are on notifications. So this is a very quick way to kind of filter different items. So I do find this very useful at times. So the only way I can get to that is to save a direct link to that particular item. So those are the typical support resources. So my Oracle support, the Update Center, learnjde.com. The Oracle Learning Library and learnjde.com are really the same site, just different portions of it and different ways of searching and navigating. In terms of training, the advisor webcast, if you go to the support site, and we were just there, and simply need to type in advisor webcast, and that's going to pull that down for us. So there's a current and archived, and we're going to filter on JD Edwards. So the advisor webcasts are put on by the support organization. LearnJDE.com and all those tutorials are usually done by the product management. Here's something that's coming out. The support organization within JD Edwards puts on these more detailed items. So for example, here's Exploring Server Manager. So this is one just on Server Manager. This is coming out February 12th, 2019. Even if you're not able to attend, I suggest registering for it, because then it will also send you a direct link for downloading it. But you can also go through and look at prior webcasts. So working with E1 Pages, which came out earlier this year, you can just simply click, download the PDF, or you can download the actual recording itself. So these are typically 1 hour, step-by-step, going through really deep explanation. Anything was on learnjde.com is typically limited to about a 10-minute overview or presentation, which is really good, because if you want to learn about one thing in particular, for example, let's say that you wanted to learn, if that will actually come up. Okay, we missed that one. Okay, so let's suppose we wanted to learn about Enterprise One Search or the AIS server. It's going to give you something anywhere between 5 and 10 minutes on that specific topic. So they're more micro topics in nature. Other items to take a look at there, the Oracle Technology Network. The OTN, or the Oracle Technology Network, is where you will find past downloads for earlier versions of WebLogic or other components. So primarily a download site, but they also do offer some training on that site as well. So that could be full, descriptive information. It might have some Oracle by example there as well, which is another type of step-by-step training. Now for documentation, Typically, if you go to oracle.com, it is a little bit more to navigate over to the JD Edwards portion of that, but a lot of good information, and that typically gives you the product overview. If you want to go and get help documentation, that is docs.oracle.com. So just to show you the difference between them, if we go to oracle.com, and takes a little bit more to navigate to that. It's buried a little bit deeper here, changes a few times, but if we look at products, and if we go to, just take a second to load up, there we go, products. Typically we have to go to products A to Z, and it may be under acquired company products, and then JD Edwards. We've got J for JD Edwards. And the reason that you do want to go here, oh, it's going to be somewhere here. The reason that you typically do want to go to this particular site is it's going to give you that high level overview description of features that might be really advantageous if you're just learning about something. Case in point, if you want to learn more about, in particular, UX1, or if you want to know about OneView. So this is where you would go to download samples of all of the OneView reporting. So here you can say, I want to go OneView financials, and you can download a sample, look at a demo for all of those, as well as a presentation. So this gives you a high-level overview. Docs.oracle.com. Within a matter of seconds, we can go into applications, we can go into JD Edwards, and we can look up all the manuals for every version of JD Edwards there ever was. So in this particular case, let's go into applications, and we want to look at some UI items. So we want to see, how do we do stuff with OneView? So there's OneView reporting guide, OneView financial statements. You can either look at it as a PDF, or you can get a document for downloading. These documents do cycle often, so take a look at the date that is associated there. Additionally, you also want to look at the net change document. So for any application, there's always going to be, here's what has changed recently. So there's the net change guide, everything from the GA date up until now. So if you've missed out on a couple of things, the net change guide specifically tells you everything that has changed in one particular module. Okay, so I think we're just about up on time now. I know that's a lot to cover, and that's kind of the end of our three-part series. These will be available as downloaded web sessions, as well as the PDFs and presentations are available on our website. Other items I've just thrown in here: where to get certifications, where to download all the various different pieces of software. So with that, I will open it up for questions on the chat window. I see there's a couple on the Q&A here. So you can either just raise your hand in the chat window. And I see, okay, so what is the user group action to get the log? So unfortunately, if you want to have people be able to get the logs, they would typically also have to be able to change the configuration for that. One possible way around that is if it's just a file share, so you could allow them to grab the log directly from there. But outside of that, we try not to have people have access to those servers. But once they, within the login configuration, that's just based off where it actually is. Let me just kind of go here and go to Server Manager, just to respond on that one particular question. So once you are within Server Manager and you take a look at, So in order to get the logs in here, you can go through, you can look at the logs, and we didn't go through how to do the log filtering, but the log filtering allows you to do a number of things here. We can search on particular items within a log, but you can also download the entire log. What you could actually do just is to differentiate between those activities. So if we take a look at the Server Manager users, if you wanted to go through and see what the difference is between those, you can actually go through and say in terms of logging, okay? One of these has a description for logging, then you could determine if you can actually separate those two. But I do believe that if you're going to give them access to the web product instance itself, it's going to also allow them to do logging, but also allow them to change some of that configuration there. So that might be something that you want to consider before granting those permissions. Okay. Other questions? Okay, there's a question coming in. What should the business analysts have access to? Generally, all of those things that I did mention today, I don't think there's any harm, and I think there's a lot of benefit to that. Obviously, from a security perspective, you don't want to have everyone having full access to everything. There isn't as much fine control over some things in Server Manager as you would potentially want to have them, such as the previous question, can we give people access to look at the logs only? Typically within Server Manager, no. There's other ways around that. But everything that we take a look at here, the business analyst, I don't see any harm for them having access to. It's going to be a little bit different for each environment, but I think it's something that you can negotiate with, because if you have view-only access to most of these items, there's really nothing that can be, no harm that can really be done there. Okay. Another question coming in. Let me just kind of flip back to that screen there just to address that. So the performance workbench, where do you download that? If you just simply go out to the Oracle support site, and I think I had it up here. Okay, so on the Oracle support site, if you type in performance workbench, okay, so there's Performance Workbench. You can go and you can download it directly from there. It's not very difficult to actually use. There is a little bit of a helps. This was just updated last month, so they've corrected a couple of issues. But again, it's a good log parsing tool if you don't have any other one. And the key thing that it does here that a lot of other tools do not give you is the timing gap file. Timing gap is really critical if you're trying to resolve a performance issue, because most of the time when you're having a performance issue, it's one, you're trying to duplicate the issue. That's the first challenge. And two, you want to try and find out where the code is spending the most amount of time. If you can reproduce the issue, then you can get a log file. Once you have a log file, you run it through Performance Workbench, and it's going to instantly tell you where the code is spending the most amount of time. Then you just need to focus your energy on that one particular section. Okay. Well, seeing how there's no additional questions coming in, thank you all once again for joining and taking time out of your day. And with that, I will end this session. And if you have any other further questions, please feel free to email me, cdaws, @syntax.com. And please remember that we do have a couple of additional webinars that are coming up in the near future. And those are specifically on our application managed services, as well as we'll have another series starting next year on Orchestrator and AIS and mobility. So please stay tuned for those. With that, have a great rest of your day, and thank you once again for joining here today. Bye-bye.